We all know Valve is never going to make Half-Life 3, so the only way it was going to be released is if a lone Russian dude made it in his spare time. And here it is, VLADiK Brutal. It's got an authoritarian regime, it's got an experiment gone wrong, it's got an invasive species of creatures, it's got a crowbar, it's got a main character called VLADiK, aka Gordonsky Friedman. At least the game recognizes it's a Half-Life clone. And besides, Russians are already stealing our state secrets, so it's only natural that they start stealing our game ideas too. You start the game in prison. Presumably you've been imprisoned for going against the government at some point. You're asked to work in a lab the regime has built to help research ways to strengthen their troops. It's not clear if you're an actual scientist or whether they just need expendable people for dangerous work. It's got a pretty compelling intro. It introduces you to the world and the conditions really well. It's heavily inspired by Half-Life, of course, but the facility you walk through is huge, and it's clear these guys are up to no good. Just look at the state of that desktop. Bro's never heard of folders. And what is he typing? He looks like me at work when I'm trying to look busy. You're chosen to be the switch flipper to turn on a big reactor. You're treated to some nostalgic sound effects, and inevitably, the whole place goes. You awaken to find the whole lab covered in bulbous fleshy goo stuff, and it's not long until you're being jump scared by the creatures it's created. Overall, the game is a lot creepier than Half-Life. It's Half-Life if the entire game was set in Ravenholm. The creatures are varied. You have your slow zombie types, a faster variant, mini ones that remind me of the bone fetish things from Diablo 2. You have invisible variants where you see a strange glimmer so you know their general direction, but if you miss them they can pop up in your face and do damage and jump scare you. You have larger, tough boomer types. There's really a great variety, even early in the game. It also wastes no time in giving you a decent arsenal. You'll have a pistol, AK, grenades and molotovs within about 20 minutes after the explosion. It really puts you straight into the action and doesn't let off. The molotovs in particular can come in clutch. The game likes to have you open a door then immediately have 10 enemies come rushing out. A well-placed molly cooks them up nicely. The game's got a great atmosphere. There's slug creatures everywhere, dilapidated buildings. It's exactly like how my Western media describes Russia to me. The fact that there's always something moving on screen with the slug things is really unnerving. You're already paranoid, looking for any enemy movement, so the fact there's harmless slugs moving around on screen too just puts you in a heightened state of anxiety. Now, it wouldn't be Half-Life 3 without puzzles. Whilst they're not particularly hard, they do break up the gunplay sequences nicely. I do wish there was more variety to them. A lot of them involve finding a battery to place in a device which powers a switch so you can proceed. I spent way too long in this area. My first instinct was to not jump towards the spinning fans for fear of death. Once I realized I'm playing a video game, I tried it and was able to float. Word of warning though, you have to hold the sprint button down so you can actually reach the next fan, which to me seems nonsensical. How can you sprint in midair? It does have an experimental weapon that you can find. It would be too on the nose for it to be a gravity gun in the Half-Life sense, but it does use gravity to pull enemies together and tear them apart. I really like the gun's sounds and effects. The guns have real weight to them. It reminds me a bit of Black, a game from 2006 which still has some of the best gun sounds in gaming. I was expecting the game to take place entirely in the lab. Maybe it ends with you escaping or finding a way to stop the monsters, but the majority of the game is actually spent outside of the lab. Due to the disruption, the people have started an uprising and you meet up with your old cellmate to hatch a plan to overthrow the corrupt government. It even has driving segments. The car steering isn't too hot though, so you will have to make use of the handbrake driftu.
is no fear tonight, there is no mercy to ride. Who's gonna be number one? Who's gonna lose too much time? On the Kira Mountain, every day and every night, the racing speed starting and red suns are ready to fight.
It kind of turns into a different game at this point, where you're going from checkpoint to checkpoint taking out enemy soldiers, which is fun because by this stage you've almost got the full arsenal of weapons. I honestly do prefer the more tense monster sections, and I did find the game start to drag a bit when it was just driving from one checkpoint, taking out the soldiers, flipping a switch to open a gate, and on to the next checkpoint. It may seem like a weird thing to complain about. Oh no, there's too much game. I just mean from a game flow standpoint, these sections overstayed their welcome a bit. Thankfully it does have you going back to some monster-filled areas periodically, which I think is where the game shines. The bosses can be a bit hit or miss. Some of them are better than others. A few of them have you basically sprinting away, then turning around to get some shots off and repeating the process till they're dead. The larger bosses that have some actual mechanics are more engaging. I've encountered very few bugs. We do have a slight issue with the ladders. They're a bit scuffed. When they work, but when they don't, you die. I mean, to be fair, ladders are hard. It took Bethesda 20 years before they were comfortable enough to put ladders in their games. In terms of how the game is run from a technical standpoint, it's been absolutely seamless. No issues. The auto-saving has been really good too. Wait, it's put me back here? Oh, and now it's frozen. To be fair, this only happened once. It did corrupt my save, so whenever I would load that save it would freeze the game, which meant I had to listen to this conversation again. I was scared of going in the kitchen in case it happened again, so I threw a Molotov in there to hopefully kill that freeze bug with fire. One thing that really impressed me with this game, and it may seem like a little thing, in the video options menu it actually gives you a visual representation of what each setting does. Some quadruple A games don't even do that. The menu and settings are really good overall. I'm used to reviewing games that don't even give you an option to lower music volume, so having all these options is a welcome change. The English subtitles are a little scuffed, but that's okay. This game's for Russians, and any game that distracts Russians from playing Counter-Strike is okay by me. It means I'll have less of them on my team being drunk, missing shots and shouting racial slurs. Just kidding, Russians. I love you really. Some of my favourite chat roulette calls have been at 2 AM with drunk Russians, where we set the world right and I try to bait them into being anti-Putin so they get arrested. Only for the memes though, no hate. In my experience, Russians are good at taking a bit of banter. They give as good as they get. To be fair, I'm English, so there's no limit to the criticisms you could level at me. Crooked teeth, eating baked beans unironically, needing a license to watch TV, etc. It may look like I'm indiscriminately gunning down civilians here, but you have to understand that I've been conditioned over many hours of gameplay to shoot anything that moves. If they lay down and froze, they may have made it to the credits with their lives. After many arduous battles and thousands dead, you reach the location where the big baddie is, and you storm it with the rest of the rebels. It's one of those battles where your guys respawn and their enemies respawn. I was a bit confused about what to do. At first I thought I had to take out all the tanks they have, then maybe they would stop respawning, but that didn't work. I ended up just save scumming and running into the building until eventually I didn't die. I won't spoil the ending, of course. It took me about 6.5 hours to complete the game, and with varying difficulty levels you might want to challenge yourself to another playthrough on hard. Overall, the game is a loving homage to the Half-Life series. Although familiar, it does set itself apart with its darker tone and more impactful gunplay. If you like Half-Life, it's a no-brainer. At $12 on Steam, it's more than worth the price of entry.